Elena Marsh stood on the marble platform in front of the entire assembly of Pax, and she already knew what was coming. She could see it in the way Damien would not look at her. 2 years of marriage had taught her to read him better than anyone alive, and right now, his silence was the loudest thing in the room. The great hall of Blackridge Castle was full that night. 6 territories had sent their leaders. Long tables stretched along both sides of the room, filled with alphas, their mates, and their advisors. Candlelight flickered against the stone walls. Everyone had come expecting a simple announcement about a new trade agreement between the Pax. Nobody expected what happened next. Damien Voss, the Alpha King, stood at the head of the hall in his black formal coat, his crown catching the light. He was tall, broad, and carried himself like a man who had never once been told no. For 2 years, Elena had been his Luna. She had worn the title quietly, without complaint, even though the whispers never stopped. She was too plain, too quiet, not strong enough in her wolf, not worthy of a king like him. Elena had heard all of it. She had smiled through all of it. Tonight, she stood beside him in a simple gray dress, her hands folded in front of her, her chin lifted just enough to hide what she was feeling. Damien cleared his throat, and the room fell silent. "I have an announcement," he said. His voice was steady, confident, the voice of a man who had rehearsed this moment in his head many times. "For 2 years, Elena Marsh has stood beside me as Luna. She has been loyal. She has been patient." He paused. Elena felt her stomach tighten. "But loyalty is not enough to lead this kingdom," Damien continued. "A Luna must be strong. She must carry power in her blood, power that can protect our people in war and in peace. Elena has given me nothing of the sort." A murmur spread through the crowd. Elena did not move. She had trained herself, over many months, not to move when it mattered most. "Tonight," Damien said, "I remove Elena Marsh from the title of Luna. She will no longer stand at my side." The words landed like stones dropped into still water. Gasps rippled through the hall. Some guests exchanged shocked glances. Others, especially those from Pax that had never liked Elena to begin with, leaned forward with obvious interest, waiting to see what would happen next. Damien turned toward a young woman standing near the front of the hall. Genevieve Cross wore a deep red gown, her dark hair pinned high, her expression carefully arranged into something between sympathy and satisfaction. Genevieve came from one of the oldest and strongest bloodlines among the Pax. Everyone in that hall understood, in that instant, exactly who Damien intended to place beside him instead. "Genevieve Cross," Damien said, "will take her place." Elena did not cry. She did not shout. She did not beg him to reconsider in front of everyone, which was, she realized later, the one thing Damien had expected her to do. Instead, she reached up with steady hands and unclasped the silver pendant around her neck, the one that marked her as Luna of Blackridge. She held it out to him. "You do not need to take it from me," she said quietly. "I will not make you work for something you have already decided." She placed the pendant in his open palm before he could react. Then she turned, and without another word, she walked out of the hall. Nobody in that room understood the weight of what she had just done. To them, it looked like defeat. To Elena, it was the last shred of dignity she intended to keep. Backstage, in a small stone chamber usually reserved for assembly clerks, Elena finally allowed herself to stop walking. She did not sit down. She did not sob into her hands the way people in stories were supposed to. Instead, she looked down at the hem of her dress, which had caught on a loose nail near the chamber door and torn slightly along one side. She knelt down. She smoothed the torn fabric between her fingers. She folded it over once, then again, tucking the frayed edge under so it would not show. Her hands moved slowly, carefully, as if the only thing left in the world that still belonged to her was this small strip of gray fabric. She did not think about Damien's face. She did not think about Genevieve's red gown. She thought about the hem of her dress, and she fixed it, stitch by stitch, with a needle she carried in a small pouch at her waist, because that was something she could control, and there was very little else left that she could. Outside the chamber, the hall had not gone quiet. If anything, the noise had grown louder. Whispers turned into open conversation. Alphas leaned toward each other, already speculating about what the change in leadership meant for trade agreements, for alliances, for the balance of power between territories. Damien stood at the head of the hall, accepting handshakes and nods of approval from pack leaders who had never fully trusted Elena in the first place. Then the doors at the far end of the hall opened. A single figure walked in, broad-shouldered, dressed in plain dark clothing, without any crest or symbol. The man moved with the quiet confidence of someone who had spent his whole life protecting things more important than himself. He was Elena's personal guard, a man named Torin, who had served her since the day she first arrived at Blackridge. Torin walked the length of the hall without hesitation. He stopped in front of the platform where Damien still stood. Then, in front of every Alpha, every Luna, every advisor from all 6 territories, Torin dropped to one knee and bowed his head. The hall went silent. Damien frowned. "Torin, what is this?" Torin did not look up. "My king," he said. "You may have removed Elena Marsh as your Luna, but you cannot remove what she is." "Explain yourself," Damien said, his voice sharper now. Torin rose slowly and turned to face the crowd instead of Damien. "Elena Marsh is not her true name," he said. "It is the name she has carried since childhood, given to her for her protection. Her true name is Elena Corwin, last living heir of the Corwin bloodline." A gasp swept through the hall, louder this time, sharper. Several of the older pack leaders rose from their seats without seeming to realize they had moved. "The Corwin bloodline," Torin continued, "is the founding line of this assembly. Every pack seated in this room tonight, including yours, my king, swore a blood oath centuries ago to protect and honor any true heir of that line, above all other titles, above all other crowns. That oath has never been broken. It has never expired. It binds every pack in this hall, whether they remember swearing it or not." Damien's face had gone pale. "That bloodline died out generations ago," he said. "There is no proof." "There is proof," Torin said calmly. He reached into his coat and produced a small sealed scroll, old parchment marked with a wax seal that several of the oldest alphas in the room recognized immediately. One by one, murmurs of recognition rippled through the crowd. An elderly alpha from the Northern Territory rose fully to his feet, his hand pressed to his chest. "That seal," the old alpha said, his voice shaking slightly. "I have seen that seal only once before, in my grandfather's records. It is the Corwin royal seal." Slowly, the old alpha lowered himself to one knee. Then another alpha rose and did the same. Then another. Within moments, nearly every leader from the 6 territories had risen from their seats and knelt, not toward Damien, but toward the chamber door where Elena had disappeared only minutes before. Genevieve Cross stood frozen at the front of the hall in her red gown, suddenly looking very much like a woman who had walked onto the wrong stage. Damien stood alone at the head of the hall, his crown suddenly feeling much heavier than it had a few minutes earlier. Elena stepped back into the hall. She had heard everything from the chamber doorway. Her dress was still slightly torn along the hem, now neatly folded and pinned, and her hands were calm at her sides. She walked forward through the kneeling crowd, past rows of bowed heads, until she reached the platform where Damien still stood. He reached for her hand, the same hand he had let go of only minutes before in front of everyone in that hall. "Elena," he said, his voice lower now, almost pleading, "I did not know. If I had known." Elena looked down at his outstretched hand, as if it belonged to someone she had never met. She did not take it. She did not explain herself. She did not offer him comfort, or forgiveness, or even anger. She simply looked at him for a long moment, long enough for the entire hall to understand that whatever had existed between them before that night was no longer something Damien could reach with an apology. Then she turned to face the kneeling assembly instead. "Rise," she said simply. The alphas rose, one after another, though none of them took their eyes off her. Elena spoke clearly, her voice carrying easily across the silent hall. "The blood oath sworn to my family binds every pack in this room to fair dealing, honest alliance, and protection of the weak among you. I intend to hold every territory to that oath, starting tonight." She turned to the Northern Alpha, the one who had first recognized the seal. "Lord Hendricks, I understand your territory has struggled with unfair trade terms for grain shipments through Blackridge lands for many years." The old Alpha blinked, clearly surprised she knew this. "That is true, my lady. That changes as of tonight, Elena said. New terms will be drawn up. Terms that benefit your people as much as they benefit Blackridge. She continued down the hall, speaking to leader after leader, addressing grievances that had gone unspoken for years, offering solutions that clearly came from someone who had been listening carefully to every conversation in that castle for the past 2 years, even when nobody thought she mattered enough to notice. Damien watched from the platform, saying nothing, because there was nothing left for him to say. The alliance he had spent months building around Genevieve's bloodline crumbled in real time, replaced by something far older and far more powerful, standing right in front of him. By the end of the evening, Elena had reorganized trade agreements across 4 territories, all without raising her voice, all without a single threat. The alphas who had laughed quietly at her a year ago now waited for her to finish speaking before daring to add anything of their own. Genevieve Cross left the hall quietly, her red gown suddenly looking like a costume worn for a play that had already ended. Damien remained at Blackridge. His crown remained on his head, but everyone in that hall understood, by the time the candles burned low, that the true power in that castle no longer answered to him. Elena did not gloat, she did not celebrate. When the last of the alphas had finished speaking with her, and the hall slowly emptied, she walked out through the same doors Torin had entered through earlier that night, her torn hem still neatly folded, her steps calm and unhurried. Torin fell into step behind her without a word. Behind them, Damien stood alone in the great hall of Blackridge Castle, surrounded by empty tables and dying candles, in a room that had once been entirely his. He called her name once, quietly, into the empty space where she had been standing only moments before. Nobody answered.